My brother and his wife stole my inheritance, laughing at the idea that I would never be able to fight back. I just smiled and let them believe they had won, until the day their house was no longer theirs. My name is Nathan, and I'm 35 years old. My older brother, Eric, who is 38, has always been the golden child. Our parents spoiled him endlessly, while I was treated like an afterthought. Despite that, I never expected him to steal my inheritance, let alone mock me as he did it. He and his wife, Julia, 36, thought I was too weak to fight back. They were wrong. When our parents passed away, money was the last thing on my mind. I wasn't thinking about who would inherit what. I was grieving. But Eric and Julia? They were already circling like vultures. A week after the funeral, we sat in my parents' lawyer's office, listening to the reading of the will. I wasn't expecting any surprises. My parents had always been clear. The family home, the place I had lived in and taken care of for years, would go to me. Eric had his own life, a well-paying job, and a house with Julia. He had never wanted anything to do with our childhood home.
Until now.
The lawyer adjusted his glasses and cleared his throat. To my eldest son, Eric, and his wife, Julia, we leave the remainder of our financial assets and stocks. Eric grinned. Julia squeezed his hand. To our youngest son, Nathan, we leave. The lawyer hesitated, then frowned. My heart stopped. The house will remain in Eric's possession. I blinked. That wasn't right. I turned to Eric, my mouth dry. What the hell is this? He smirked. Guess Mom and Dad had a change of heart. Julia laughed softly, leaning into him. Don't take it personally, Nate. You were never really the responsible one. It felt like a punch to the gut. This house wasn't just property, it was my home. I had lived there for years, taking care of our parents while Eric barely visited. I had spent my own money on renovations and maintenance, keeping the house in good shape. And now, I had nothing. The moment I left the lawyer's office, I started digging. Something didn't add up. My parents had always been clear about their intentions. There was no way they would have changed the will at the last minute, unless someone made them. I requested copies of the documents, and what I found made my blood run cold. The will had been altered just 1 month before our father passed away. The signatures looked off. A suspicious notary had witnessed the changes, someone connected to Julia's side of the family. My stomach churned. Eric and Julia had manipulated our dying parents into signing everything over to them. And then, they had the audacity to laugh in my face. That evening, I showed up at their house, documents in hand. Eric opened the door, already holding a glass of whiskey, smirking.
Nate.
Thought you'd be too busy crying to drop by. I shoved the papers at him. Explain this. He barely glanced at them before chuckling. Legal documents, little brother. You wouldn't understand. Julia appeared behind him, looking annoyed. Seriously, Nathan? Are we really doing this? You think throwing a tantrum is going to change anything? I clenched my fists. You lied. You manipulated them. Eric shrugged. They were old, confused. We just helped them make the right choice. That was it. That was the moment I realized they didn't just steal from me. They enjoyed it. You'll never be able to fight back, Eric sneered, taking a slow sip of his drink. You don't have the money. You don't have the power. You don't even have a place to live. Julia giggled, shaking her head. Poor Nate. Always the loser. I stood there, boiling with rage. But then I took a deep breath, and I smiled. Not a forced grin. Not an act of defiance. Just a quiet, knowing smile. Eric's expression faltered. What? I stepped back, calm and cold. Nothing, I said. You're right. I can't fight back. Then I turned around and walked away. And as I did, I could feel their eyes on me, because for the first time, they weren't sure if they had actually won. Eric and Julia thought they had beaten me, that I'd slink away, humiliated, with nothing, that they were untouchable. They were dead wrong. I wasn't going to scream, fight, or beg. I was going to destroy them. And the best part? They wouldn't see it coming. The first thing I did was hire the best lawyer I could afford. I wasn't rich, but I had enough, and I knew this case was worth every penny. When I sat down in my lawyer's office, I laid everything out. The sudden change to the will, just 1 month before our father passed. The shady notary, a known associate of Julia's family. The suspicious signatures that didn't match my parents' previous legal documents. My lawyer, David, frowned as he flipped through the papers. "This smells like fraud," he muttered. I nodded. "Can we prove it?" He exhaled, tapping his fingers against the desk. "It'll take time. But if this is what it looks like, your brother could be in serious legal trouble." The fall of Eric and Julia. I clenched my jaw. Good. Eric thought I couldn't fight back. He was about to learn just how wrong he was. Eric had always acted like he was financially invincible. Big house, luxury cars, extravagant vacations. Julia draped herself in designer brands like she was royalty. They loved flaunting their wealth, making sure I knew how much better their life was. But here's the thing about people like them. They always spend more than they have. So I started digging. Credit reports, maxed out cards, mortgage payments behind, property taxes overdue. It turned out their lavish lifestyle wasn't built on wealth, it was built on debt. And the house, the one they stole from me, it was leveraged to the brink. Eric had taken out a massive home equity loan after getting the house, using it to fund their lifestyle. The second they missed a payment, the bank would come knocking. That's when I knew exactly how I was going to destroy them. I didn't go after them right away, that would have been too easy. Instead, I let them dig their own graves. For the next 2 months, I watched, waited, let them believe they had won. Meanwhile, my lawyer gathered evidence, hiring experts to analyze the signatures on the will. I subtly reached out to the bank, inquiring about the mortgage, knowing full well it was in trouble. I let Eric and Julia keep spending, knowing they were running on fumes. Then, one day, Eric called me.
Nate.
"Buddy." His voice was overly cheerful, fake as hell. "Been a while. How's life?" I smirked. "Busy." Yeah, I bet. "Listen, I was thinking about Mom and Dad's house. Maybe I was a little harsh. Maybe we can work something out." There it was, the desperation creeping in. They were struggling. They needed help. Too bad for them. I wasn't their safety net. "Oh, don't worry about it, Eric," I said smoothly. "You won fair and square." I could almost hear his teeth grinding. "Right, of course." He hung up fast. And that's when I knew they were officially sinking. And I was about to pull the last lifeline. Eric and Julia had no idea their world was about to come crashing down. For 2 months, I let them believe they had won. That I had accepted defeat and walked away with nothing. Meanwhile, I was tightening the noose. And now it was time to watch them fall. The first hit came on a Wednesday morning, the day the lawsuit was served. It wasn't just a simple inheritance dispute. My lawyer had stacked the case with fraud allegations, financial misconduct, and a formal request to void the fraudulent will. The evidence was airtight. Handwriting experts confirmed the signatures were forged. Witness testimonies linked the notary to previous fraud cases. Bank records proved Eric and Julia manipulated my parents before their deaths. They had no defense. And by the time the court was done with them, they wouldn't just lose the house, they'd be paying for legal damages too. I didn't warn them. I let the lawsuit blindside them. And oh, did it hit hard. That afternoon, my phone rang. Eric's name flashed on the screen. I let it ring. Then Julia called. I let it ring. Then came the texts. "Eric, what the hell is this? You're suing us?" "Eric, Nate, come on. We're family." "Eric, you can't do this." "Eric, you won't win. We'll fight you in court." I just smiled. They were already scared.
Good.
2 weeks after the lawsuit landed, the foreclosure notice hit. I had quietly tipped off the bank about Eric's missed payments. See, when Eric stole the house, he had taken out a massive home equity loan, assuming he'd pay it off once the inheritance settled. But now, with legal action pending, the bank froze their access to the house's equity. And that meant one thing. They were officially broke. Eric and Julia tried to hold it together. They kept up appearances, still throwing dinner parties, still posting on social media like their life was perfect. But behind the scenes, they were imploding. Their credit cards? maxed out. Julia tried to sell her designer bags, got pennies for them. Eric begged his wealthy friends for loans. They all turned him down. Then, 1 month after the lawsuit landed, the final blow hit. An official court order. The fraudulent will was overturned. The house legally belonged to me. They had 30 days to vacate. It was over. The final confrontation. The night the eviction notice arrived, Eric showed up at my door. For the first time in months, I saw my brother without his smug grin. He looked exhausted. Beaten down. "Nate," he started, his voice hoarse.
Come on, man.
"This is my home." I folded my arms. "Your home?" I scoffed. "You mean the one you stole?" He flinched. "Look, I know we handled things badly. But you got what you wanted. You won. Just don't take the house." I stared at him. No remorse. No apology. Just desperation. Then Julia appeared behind him, her eyes red from crying. "Nathan, please. We have nowhere else to go." I let them stand there, watching me, waiting for mercy. Then I spoke. "You told me I'd never be able to fight back." Eric swallowed hard. "You laughed in my face," I continued. "Called me a loser. Took everything from me because you thought I was too weak to stop you." I took a step forward, lowering my voice. "Now you want my help?" Silence. Then, in the coldest tone possible, "The fall of Eric and Julia, final chapter." I delivered the final words they would ever hear from me. "Figure it out." Then, I shut the door in their faces. Eric and Julia weren't just losing a house. They were losing everything. For months, they had flaunted their victory, parading around like untouchable royalty.
But now?
Now they were homeless, broke, and completely alone. And the best part? I didn't even have to lift a finger. They did it to themselves. Watching them fall. 30 days came fast. On the morning of the eviction deadline, I decided to pay a visit. Not to gloat. Not to argue. Just to watch. When I pulled up, the scene was pathetic. Eric stood in the driveway, looking completely defeated, a half-packed moving truck behind him. Julia was on the phone, pacing furiously, probably begging someone for help. For the first time in their lives, they were facing real consequences. And judging by the looks on their faces, they were crumbling. Eric had spent years building his image, expensive cars, designer suits, flashy parties. It was all part of the illusion that he was wealthy and powerful. But the moment word spread that they had lost everything, the vultures disappeared. The so-called friends who once flocked to their house?
Gone.
The business connections Eric had bragged about? Nowhere to be found. Even Julia's social circle, the women she had spent years impressing, dropped her like a bad investment. Because here's the truth about people like Eric and Julia. No one sticks around when the money dries up. As the mover struggled to cram their overpriced furniture into the truck, Eric finally turned and spotted me. For a moment, I thought he'd explode, blame me for his downfall, scream at me. Instead, he just stared. Then, to my utter disbelief, he walked over. "Nathan," he said, his voice rough like he had spent the night crying. "Please, man. I don't have anywhere to go." I raised an eyebrow. "That's not my problem." He swallowed hard. "I messed up, okay? I was stupid. But we're brothers. Can't you just, I don't know, let us stay in the guest house? Just until we get back on our feet." I almost laughed at the audacity. "You mean the guest house that's on my property?" I said coldly. Eric winced. "Nathan, please." Julia chimed in, her voice thick with desperation. "We will pay rent. We just need a little time." I tilted my head. "You want to pay rent? With what money?" Silence. Because we all knew the truth. They had nothing left. I let the moment stretch between us before I spoke again. "You stole my inheritance," I said. Eric looked away. "You manipulated Mom and Dad into changing their will." Laughed in my face and told me I'd never be able to fight back. Julia wiped at her face, looking like she was on the verge of breaking down. "And now you want my help." I exhaled sharply. "You two deserve each other." Then, in the coldest tone I could muster, "Figure it out." I turned and walked away. This time, they didn't try to stop me. because they finally knew they had lost. Rock bottom. Eric and Julia thought they had hit rock bottom when they lost the house. They were wrong. Rock bottom wasn't losing the mansion they had stolen. Rock bottom was realizing they had nowhere to go. No friends. No savings. No backup plan. And I was about to make sure they stayed there. After the eviction, Eric and Julia had no choice but to downgrade. The lavish lifestyle?
Gone.
The fancy cars?
Sold.
The designer clothes?
Pawned.
They ended up in a rundown two-bedroom apartment on the bad side of town. Eric, once the wealthy businessman, was now desperately job hunting. And failing.
Why?
Because news had spread about the lawsuit. Nobody wanted to hire fraud. Julia, who had spent years living off Eric's money, was completely lost. No career. No skills. She went from sipping champagne at brunch to working a part-time job at a retail store. I didn't have to ruin them. They ruined themselves. Eric and Julia had built their relationship on greed and status. Without those, they had nothing. The end of Eric and Julia. Julia resented Eric for losing everything. Eric blamed Julia for pushing him to steal the house. They started fighting.
Publicly.
Loudly. One night, I got a text from an old mutual friend. Dude, just saw Eric and Julia screaming at each other in a parking lot. She threw her drink in his face. I almost felt sorry for them. Almost. Months later, I got a call from an unknown number. I picked up. Silence. Then, a familiar voice. Nathan, it's me. Julia. Her voice was shaky.
Hello.
She swallowed hard. I just wanted to say I'm sorry. I didn't respond. I didn't think it would turn out like this, she whispered. We thought we were just doing what was best for us. But we ruined everything. She let out a soft, broken laugh. Eric and I were done. He's leaving. I don't even know where I'll go. I could hear the defeat in her voice. She wasn't asking for help. She knew that was never coming. She just wanted acknowledgement. Some proof that she wasn't completely alone. And maybe years ago I would have cared.
But now?
I was done. Good luck, Julia, I said. And I hung up, blocked her number, and never looked back.